is Andy, the Atari 8-bit podcast.
And one was this little device that you plugged into the thing and you moved it around to control the cursor. And he said, I don't know what this mouse thing is, but nobody is ever going to use a mouse on a computer. He called me up at work and in the unmistakable voice said, Tom, this is Alan Alda, and I've run into a little problem. I think you're the only person that can help me. Got a bunch of friends coming over tonight. I wanted to show this program off to them.
This is an interview episode of Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. I'm Kevin Savitz. Thomas Hudson was a trainer for Atari, where he taught computer store owners and others about the Atari 8-bit computer line and attended trade shows to show off Atari's computer products. Later, he became a product manager for 3 products, the Light Pen, Touch Tablet, and Mouse. In this interview, we discuss Andrew Soderberg, whom I previously interviewed. This interview took place on January 21st, 2016. I interviewed Andrew Soderberg some time ago, and he mentioned you, and he said you would have awesome stories. All I really know about you is that you worked at Atari as a trainer and maybe a writer, and that you met your wife because of that job. And that's all I know. So I'm hoping you can...
Well, you've got the whole thing. I guess we can finish up right now.
Okay, yeah, good. Nice talking to you.
Yeah, I did meet my wife there, and that was a long time ago.
Nice. All right, so tell me the story, before the story. How did you end up at Atari? What were you doing? How did you get hired? Tell me everything.
Well, for several years, Andrew, I'm going to have to call him Andy because that's what I always call him.
Sure.
Andy and I worked together in a small computer shop. We sold CompuColor computers, which came and went, although they were a brilliant idea, and Atari computers. And when the time came for CES 1981 in Las Vegas, he and I gave each other one of those, hey, wouldn't it be great to just go have a nice boondoggle trip on the company? So we went to Las Vegas. Had an incredible time there, but we spent probably 50% of our time hanging around the Atari booth. First of all, it was probably one of the nicest looking booths around, but we wanted to get to know the technology more than we already did. Mm-hmm. What we ended up doing at one point was talking to some potential buyers and customers who came by because we were in suits, the Atari people were in suits, and they just assumed that we were Atari people. So we were very happy to share the knowledge that we had. And on about day 3, one of the Atari people that we'd been spending a lot of time with said, you guys know more than about half the people in this booth. You really ought to go over to the Hilton Hotel up to room 602 and interview because we're hiring people. So we headed over to the Hilton, individual 5-minute, I think they were, about interviews. And Andy was told there probably was a position for him, which indeed, within a couple of weeks, they called him and invited him down for an interview. But it took a couple of months before I got a phone call late in the evening from Andy, who wanted me to speak with a person by the name of Bill Karras. And after maybe 3 minutes, Bill said, hey, listen, I've got to get off the phone, but I'm going to have some people call you tomorrow. And okay, fine. Figuring, 10 o'clock at night, what business person is going to call with something serious? But the next morning, I get a phone call from HR, and they say, we want you to fly down tomorrow and interview. And I don't have a ticket or anything. They said, no, we'll have a ticket waiting for you, and there'll be a rental car waiting for you with a map, and we'll see you at 11 o'clock. So I headed down there the next morning.
From where? Where were you flying out from?
From Medford, Oregon.
Okay.
So took the twice-a-day United Airlines flight, the 6:05 a.m. version, and I'm not a morning person. But I showed up and had a nice interview with Bill, met the other 3 people in the department, And then we all went out to lunch, and Bill said, okay, here's where we find out what kind of a person you are. You want anything to drink? And I looked at him, and I could see a little twinkle in his eye. I said, yeah, I'd like a beer. He said, good man. And that was about it. I get back home. The next morning, I get another phone call. It's the same HR person saying, here's the offer. Can you start in 2 weeks? It was, basically bam, bam, bam.
Wow.
And so I went to work for them in the training department as the national sales trainer, in charge of the beautiful little 25-station training room that had a projection TV in it, and was tossed to the wolves the very second day I was there. Oh, by the way, Tom, there's a 2-day training that you have to hold starting this morning.
Wow.
And so I did. And I've always been pretty fast on my feet. So it was all sorts of basic stuff. I had a little bit of an outline to go from, and I did manage to fill the 2 days. And I guess that was my trial by fire, because they were happy with me, and I stayed in training for, probably 23 of the 29 months that I was with Atari.
Wow. So you were training about use of the computers, or what?
Oh, I was doing everything from introducing some internal people to the concept of the on-OFF switch, which seemed to completely befuddle a few of the people. Why do I have to push that? Because you want to turn it on. Oh, okay. So, and we're talking about people that were fairly high up in the hierarchy that had no idea how to even turn the product on. But I was teaching people from Canada and England, and we had a group that came in from Germany, a lot of different companies around the United States, and actually I think one Japanese contingent came through because they were picking up the product, and they wanted their people to know as much about it as possible. So I taught them everything from basic specs to how to program fun little, very useless, fun little programs into the thing.
So
and
these were generally salespeople that you were training, with the occasional Japanese end user?
95% of them were salespeople, yeah. A couple of people that came through were, management types with chain stores that had picked up the product, or were trying to get better sales out of the people on the sales floor. So they came in, and a lot of times they stood in the back with their arms crossed over their chests, looking rather grumpy, while their people seemed to excel at learning about the things. And by the time everybody went away, most people were very happy. And from what we got as feedback after the fact, sales were increasing in all of the locations where the people had come in for training, which isn't surprising. If someone is handed a technology that's really brand new and very foreign, it's difficult to sell it until you understand what the heck the thing is about.
Sure.
So anyway, that was pretty much my job, doing not just 2-day trainings, but 1-day trainings, and doing books and pamphlets and other things that could go into stores so that some of the training could be done on site by people who had come to one of my trainings, and they ended up being the trainers for their stores or their chains. And everybody ended up getting something to take away. Sometimes it was a really nice book. Bill Karras was a wannabe author, and in fact, he did end up writing a book at one point, but he loved to put together little 50, 60, 80 page shirt pocket books and reference pieces. And we had a wonderful graphic artist by the name of David who could do all of the graphics for us, and I ended up doing a lot of the writing. Bill would come up with the ideas, and I would flesh it out into people speak.
Nice.
Yeah. So Yeah, and I guess, it kind of quickly led into the whole idea of me meeting my future wife, if you'd like to hear that one.
Of course I do.
Okay. Well, let's see, I started working on the 5th of July, so about the 21st, 22nd of August, we had a group of people come in from a company called Pacific Stereo. They were going to be selling, and they had a trainer who came in, but they also had a young woman who was with or representing the manufacturer's rep firm that actually kind of like the distributor for the products into their store.
Mm-hmm.
Late morning, the liaison woman at Atari, who worked with outside groups to use our facility, came around the corner of my cube and knocked on it, said, "Tom, could you come help?" And I had a huge stack of things I needed to get through. I said, "Sherry, I'm sorry, I'm really kind of busy." She goes, "Well, see, there's this really cute girl in the training room, and she's run into a product that's brand new. She doesn't know anything about it." I said, "Sherry," and I pointed at my stack, and she says, "But she's really cute." I said, "Okay." And I got up, and as we're heading around the corners to get to the room, I said, "All right, what's her name?" She goes, "Her name's Patty Richards." And of course, I immediately got this image in my head. So we walk in through the doors, and it's pretty dark in there because of the projection TV. Sherry and I step about 10 feet in, and I'm looking around. And I say, "Okay, where is this Patty Richards?" And from down below my chin, I hear, "I'm right in front of you." And I look down into the face of this incredibly gorgeous young woman. But I said, "You're not at all what I expected." And she popped right back with, "Well, then tell me what you expected." Now, I have to explain, kind of as an aside, Patty is Chinese by birth,
Mm-hmm.
raised in the U.S. by a U.S. American Air Force couple. But I'm looking down at her face, and I said, "Well, with a name like Patty Richards, I was expecting, 5'6", 5'7", blonde hair, blue eyes, kind of woman that probably in the evenings likes to sit around with a glass of white wine and has a cat." And she went, "Wrong, wrong, 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 wrong." And 51 weeks later, we got married. It was just one of those things. And it turns out that her parents had adopted her. My parents had adopted me. So we had that in common. But both of our fathers were ex-military. And so we had a lot of the same values and morals and that sort of thing. So after about 2 weeks of dating, it was like, "How long have we known each other?" 2 weeks. "Why?" She said, "It feels like I've been with you for a year." I said, "Well, I hope that's a good thing, because I feel like I've known you for pretty much all my life." And it snowballed from there.
And you guys are still together?
Oh, we're still together. Yeah.
Now you have known her pretty much all your life.
Yeah. 34 years coming up this year.
Wow. Congratulations. So I have two questions. One's mundane. You mentioned you knew the dates, but you said July 4th, but I don't know what year we're talking about yet.
81.
81. And is Patty around today? Because I'd love to get the story from her perspective.
Patty is with her mother right now, who has a doctor's appointment, much to Patty's dismay, because she prefers that I drive her around. And I said, "Sorry, I got something more important." Otherwise, she would probably say, "Well, yeah, I mean, he has a better memory than I do for these things, but that's pretty much what I remember."
Okay. In my experience, the two parties often have very different stories.
Well, the one thing that she would add to it, and she has when we've told it to other people, is that she couldn't really see my face because the light from the doorway was behind me. But she said that she loved my voice. So,
there you go.
Which is good, because my face is nothing to write all about.
Just love at first hearing or something.
Absolutely.
Are you still in Medford?
No, we live up in the Portland area, after being down in the Bay Area for 25 years with Atari and Apple and a couple of other companies, both of us had, as I've heard someone before say, enjoyed as much as we could tolerate. And we just got the heck out in March of 2005.
Nice. What part of Portland are you? I'm in Portland too.
Yeah. I'm in a little town called West Lynn, 13 miles away from downtown Portland. And on a good clear day, I can see the radio towers up on the southwest hills from upstairs.
Nice.
It's a lovely place. We get almost the same weather as Portland, but we're just far enough around the corner and far enough away from the Columbia River that sometimes if you are getting winds and a lot of cold whipping up and down the Columbia Gorge, we're sitting here in warm fog.
Nice. Okay, so we're back at Atari. You've met Patty. You're working, training people, and falling in love. And then what happened? What changed? What was next?
Well, the next big thing was a lot of trade shows. This was in 1981, 1982, were Atari's real heydays and also their horrible, tragic demise. But Atari was going to 8 or 9 trade shows during the year. And being one of the few people who was not a management type, which meant I was a worker bee, and being one of the people who could actually operate the computers, set them up, disconnect them, pack them back up, that sort of thing, I was always being trundled off, along with Andy Soderberg, to these different trade shows. One of them was hilarious for me, and I think it was maybe my second trade show as an employee. It took place in Boston, and it was really kind of a showcase more for Atari, but it had a lot of third-party vendors who were writing games and things like that. I'm standing there after getting everything set up, and I get tapped on the shoulder. I turn around, and there's a woman with a microphone shoved in my face, and she's got a cameraman behind her who flips on this really bright light, and she says, "Hi, you're Tom Hudson, aren't you?" And I said, "I am." And I looked down at my badge just to make sure that it said my name on it. Mm-hmm. And she said, "I want to interview you." I said, "Well, okay, great." She goes, "Let's go around the corner here where it's quiet." So we went around behind everything, and she starts the whole, let's do a sound check. About 3 minutes later, she starts asking me questions. And I immediately went, uh-oh, she doesn't want me. She wants the other Tom Hudson.
Right.
There is and was another Tom Hudson who lived on the East Coast, mm-hmm. who was very well known within computer circles for his programming prowess around Atari, and especially around the processor chip that the Atari computers used. Mm-hmm. And she was asking me all of these highfalutin programming questions, and am I going to come up with some new, interesting computer language? And after about 4 minutes, maybe 5 minutes, I finally said, "Listen, I've got to come straight with you. I'm not the right Tom Hudson. I'm Tom Hudson, the trainer for Atari. You want Tom Hudson, the programmer from somewhere around Boston." And fortunately for her, we were not live on air. It was being recorded because she said a very, very dirty word, yanked the microphone away from me, turned to her cameraman and went, "Stop, turn everything off. This is not the right guy," and stomped away. And he just looked at me and he got this big silly grin on his face and he said, "Well played."
Nice. Well, it's continuing to happen because when Andrew mentioned you, I'm just like, "Oh yeah, Tom Hudson. I've interviewed him. He wrote for Analog. We talked months ago." He's like, "No, different guy." So
yeah. No, I did actually. I wrote for a magazine for a while. It was the Atari Connection that Atari published, but it was nationally distributed. I used to get all sorts of letters from people going, now why would you debase yourself after all you've done by writing for this little Atari game magazine? And I write them back and go, different Tom Hudson, I'm not in that league, and that's why I'm writing for it.
I'm not debasing myself, this is just my life.
Yeah. Yeah, but a lot of, in between trainings, there were a lot of trade shows, and trade shows usually meant, well, let's say if it was a Friday, Saturday, Sunday trade show, it meant going out about Tuesday, and sometimes even helping bolt the booth walls together, and then unpackaging everything. And when you're in places like Chicago, doing about half of the work and then having to call for a union person to come over and plug it in, because God forbid that you should plug in a simple two-prong plug into a socket. Mm-hmm. That's kind of a little editorial on my part. But then, working, maybe only 20 hours out of every 24 to get everything together, and then collapsing at probably 3 o'clock in the morning before everything starts, getting a little bit of sleep, far too many times soaking my feet in the toilet because the water was cold and could be made to swirl around them, and then getting up and working in the booth and being the source of information for a lot of the salespeople who couldn't answer some of the easier questions. But it was a lot of fun. And then, of course, at the very end, having the privilege of tearing everything down. So a 3-day show typically ended up being a 6.5 to 7 day experience.
Wow.
But we were all young at that time, and we could do these sort of things. And
Sure.
recover and live to the ripe old age of almost 61 so far.
Nice.
Yeah. Now, there's some really pretty good perks about working at Atari back then. We had a lot of people that came through just to see what these computer things were all about. Sure that you and or a lot of your audience have heard of Douglas Adams, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy fame. Douglas came over several times, and I completely failed to get a chance to meet one of my, at the time, literary heroes on 2 occasions, but on both occasions, my darling wife got to act as his driver to take him back to the airport when he was finished. She even got to go to lunch with him. Andy was at that lunch and a few other of the bigwigs at Atari. I, on the other hand, had decided to go across the building to talk to one of the product managers about a forthcoming game cartridge or something that obviously was very important in my brain, but could have been put off had I only been told Douglas Adams is coming.
Do you know why he was there? I mean, famously, he became a Macintosh guy later.
He was very, very interested in computers. And so Atari was big, Apple was big, Macintosh hadn't even really been thought of at that point. So, yeah, he came over a couple of times, and from what I hear, being a very tall man, he lumbered over the top and looked down on everybody, but thoroughly nice man. But a couple of people that I did get to meet, well, first one, I didn't really meet either of these people, but I interacted with them. Michael Jackson and his entourage came through one day, and I just happened to get up out of my cube and was starting to walk forward when he passed in front of me. Kind of startled me, and I reached out and I actually touched Michael Jackson's forearm. Just about the time that his bodyguard put his huge meaty fist in the middle of my chest, shoved me backwards down onto my butt, and said, "Nobody touches Michael." And I'm sprawled there, and another man comes around the corner and he steps into my cube and he reaches down and he off his hand and helps me up. He goes, "Hey man, I am really so sorry about that, but Mike has got this germ saying," it was Quincy Jones. And he kind of dusted off my shirt and all that, and then smiled at me and said, "Well, I got to go catch up with him," and he was gone. But
wow.
I think my proudest interaction with anybody was spending a day with Alan Alda. Alan Alda was, huge. MASH was a big hit, and he had just decided that he would sign a contract to be Atari's official spokesperson.
Mm-hmm.
But like a lot of other people, he had really no idea what the computer was all about. So he and his business manager and two other people that I cannot remember what their functions were, we all sat down in the training room, and I went through my 2-day stuff at an accelerated pace. He was absolutely fascinated by the whole programming and learning the computer language. So much so that about, probably less than a month after that, he called me up at work and in the unmistakable voice said, "Tom, this is Alan Alda, and I've run into a little problem. I think you're the only person that can help me." And so he read for an hour. He read through all of his computer code. We're talking like 400, 500 lines of computer code. And it wasn't until the very end that he said, "No, and where did I go wrong?" I said, "Well, you have a subroutine, a go-to, like up around line 50. He goes, "Yeah." I said, "You don't have anything that ends that. So what happens is it does the subroutine. It goes back to there. It continues on down the list. And then it does the subroutine over and over and over." And he said, "You have just saved me from really embarrassing myself. I've got a bunch of friends coming over tonight. I wanted to show this program off to them." He goes, "Listen, if you have any other ideas, here's my home phone number." And he gave me his home phone number. Made me promise not to use it or not to sell it, but yeah, he was a wonderful, wonderful man. He also did a huge favor for me and made lots of points with my wife. She, on hearing that he was coming, wanted to come in and hang around. "I could be your assistant. I could just sit in the corner." "No, sorry, they said nobody else other than me." So she did send a MASH picture book in with me, and at the end of the thing, when he was shaking my hand, he said, "Is there anything I can do for you? Because you've really put a lot of information in my brain." I said, "Listen, I know you don't sign autographs very often, but my wife would love to have been here." He goes, "What do you want me to sign?" And I went back into my cube, brought the book out, and he signed it, said, "To Patty, peace, Alan Alda."
Wow.
And when he handed it back to me, he goes, "That's only about the 7th autograph I've ever given." So,
wow.
Yeah.
I just need to hang on this a minute. The fact that he was the spokesperson for Atari, but then he was just like writing a basic program that he wanted to show off to his friends at a dinner party.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so good.
I have met over the years, because of working at Atari and working at Apple, and working in the theater industry up here in Portland now. I've met a lot of people, a lot of actors, and I have only met one or two that I would say were not among the nicest people I've ever met. They're just really genuinely wonderful people. I think Alan seemed to be a little befuddled by how godlike people held him in their esteem. And I think he also, although he didn't say it, so maybe I'm just projecting, but I think he appreciated just being treated like another guy in a computer class. It just happened to be almost private computer class.
Mm-hmm.
And he was actually very good at writing things. He did send me a copy of the program on one of the old 4.5-inch wide floppy disks. or 4 1/4, whatever they were.
5 1/4.
Unfortunately, he sent it in a regular envelope, and the post office decided to bend, fold, spindle, and mutilate. So I never got a chance to run the thing, but he was very proud of it.
Nice. Well, I want to interview him, but I haven't been able to get through his people, so he hasn't talked to me yet. All right. Well, keep telling stories. I'm listening if there's more.
What else? Most of my time there was an incredible amount of fun. A lot of hard work. There was one instance which doesn't reflect all that well on management, but I'm going to go ahead and tell it because it makes me look great. There was a determination by the really high ups, like Ray Kassar, who was the CEO, that a lot of people who interacted with the public were not doing so with, very eloquently, they were not public speakers. And he had witnessed somebody, I think it was the VP of marketing, stumble through a 30-minute speech with some very important people, and he hit the roof afterwards. So he hired we're going to teach you how to talk company called Decker Communications out of the Bay Area to come in, and they held several seminars. The seminar that they held for the sales and marketing people included the VP and president of sales and marketing, the 3 or 4 directors, 6 or 7 of the salespeople, myself, and 2 other people from training, and then several people that I had absolutely no idea where they came from. But we went through this 2-day training. I have never had a problem standing in front of a group of people and speaking. When it came time for me to do my very first talk, which was stand up and we'll just throw an idea at you and you have to talk continuously without pausing more than a second for 3 minutes on the subject. My subject was toes. And so I not only was speaking about toes, but I pulled my shoes off. I sat down on the chair that they had up there and I wiggled my toes at the people, and I just talked about the glorious purposes for the human toe. When the president of sales was up there, they gave him something like shirt collars, and he just froze. Like a rabbit in the headlights, he couldn't come up with anything. He was so embarrassed that by about lunchtime on day 1, he found, quote unquote, other important things to do, and he never came back in. But everybody else that got through at the very end, they came up and they said, well, you didn't need to be here. You already know how to talk in front of people. And I said, well, yeah, that's because that's my job here, to stand in front of groups of people and teach them. But it was a lot of fun watching the bigwigs totally fail at something that really, I understand the whole theory behind public speaking is one of the 3 hardest things for some people to do. But again, since I've never had trouble doing it, it just eludes me as to how people can be panic-stricken almost from it.
Yeah.
But there you go. Let's see. Like I said, there were, so many things that were great. There were a few things that weren't great. One of them was when my manager, Bill, took a position as a director in another part of the company. And we had a director of sales who had been his boss, who had just come to the company from the Hershey's chocolate people, who know nothing about computers, who devalued the whole idea of training. Well, why do training? We got people in stores to teach people. Well, here's the problem, that we're the ones that are teaching the people in stores. So he never named another manager for the group. even though I said, hey, I'll act as manager.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, okay, you can pretend. That was his word. You can pretend to be the manager, but I run this show. So that worked beautifully for about 7 months until Atari started having some problems and needed to lay people off. And then it suddenly was, well, Hudson, you're the manager. You lay your people off, which led to the very first fight that my wife and I ever had. Because I was told, you can't tell anybody. You can't even tell your wife that tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, Atari is going to be laying off about 2,500 people. And so I came home and I clammed up, but the stomach acid was churning. As any good and very loving wife would do, she was very concerned what was going on. I couldn't tell her. And finally, we got into a shouting match, and she stormed upstairs, and I slept on the sofa downstairs. But the next morning, I told her, I said, I can't not tell you. And everything was fine after that. And when I did have to lay my people off, all 10 of them, they went, yeah, we kind of knew. I said, oh, well, that's nice. All I can tell you is that it's now 10:15, and I've been told that you have to be out of the building by 11. And I said, yeah, that's okay. We've been taking stuff out to our cars all morning long. The rumor mill was rife with stuff, and we figured that if we were ever going to get out with our personal belongings and not have to be body cavity searched, we'd better do it before the announcement.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm sure they'd been stealing Trinitrons and Atari 800s since 8 a.m.
No, I had all the Trinitrons in my room. Yeah. No, I'm sure that Atari lost a lot of pens and pencils and paper and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, there's one other thing that kind of, I think, led up to the downfall. And I don't know if you'd call it too many cooks spoiling the broth sort of thing, but when I got to Atari, I would guess, without knowing exact numbers, that about 20% of the employees were management and 80% were worker bees. And that's fine because you actually can get things done with that kind of balance. And it means that for every manager, there are 5 people that end up reporting to them. And that's excellent numbers for most managers. Then, and it must have been very early in 1982, there were about 300 people that were suddenly there. And in talking to them, they were all recent MBA graduates from Harvard and Stanford and Wharton Business School. And as they were given offices, they started immediately hiring other MBAs, and pretty soon, it hadn't completely flipped the other direction, but I would say there were probably 65 to 70% of the people consider themselves to be management types. Oh, I don't do any work. I have people that do that for me. And the rest of us worker bees were really being super overtaxed. And it just doesn't work. And the company's fortunes started slipping, and it slipped and slipped and slipped until the big layoff day. And of course, as we know, Atari never really came back out of it.
Right.
Which is sad because Atari had interesting products. They might not have been as whiz-bang as they could have. And the reliance on slipping cartridges for everything meant that if you wanted to switch between one application and another, you almost had to shut the computer down, pull the first cartridge out, put the next cartridge in, start back up from scratch. So you were never going to be able to do any real business multitasking sort of things. But I think they might have overcome that. I know for certain that they had some really interesting products coming down the pike because after I let my people go, the next day, as I was packing up all of the computers, all of the Trinitrons out of the training room to go in storage, my director came in and said, I need you to go down the hall and talk to this woman, and I can't remember her name. I said, okay. He goes, now? Okay. So I went down the hall and I walked into this office and she said, oh, hi, welcome to product management. I said, excuse me? She goes, oh, didn't you know you're going to be a product manager now? No, I didn't know. So she said, yeah, and here are your products. And she gave me a list of 3 peripheral products.
Okay.
Which I sat down. She said, now, you can have about 3 weeks of getting used to what these things are and talking to the software and the hardware engineers. And then we're really going to need to get moving forward on them. So at about this same time, a new president of sales came in. And I cannot for the life of me remember his last name, but his first name was Don. Anyway, Don took a look at all of the lists of all of the different products that were being worked on, and he made tick marks next to a number of them, called a meeting of all the product managers, and read off the tick marks saying, these are products that are being taken off of the forecast. He took off all 3 of my products. One was a light pen, one was a touch tablet or drawing tablet, and one was this little device that you plugged into the thing and you moved it around to control the cursor. And he said, I don't know what this mouse thing is, but nobody is ever going to use a mouse on a computer.
Yeah, he's right there. He's pretty smart, yeah.
Yeah. The only thing about Don and his prognostication is that he did, about a week later, put the light pen back on the list because it suddenly occurred to him that tactfully interfacing with the computer screen was probably something that would be very big in the future. And yeah, I mean, we've all got phones that you touch the screen and that sort of thing, but as every time that he took the mouse off, I put the mouse back on the list. And a couple weeks later, he'd go through the list and go, well, how'd this get back on here? No idea, Don. Somebody probably from engineering wants it on there. Well, it's coming off. It's coming off. Nobody's going to use the mouse thing. And after about 3.5 months of that, I got an opportunity to leave the company. Turns out I left the company just about a week before Jack Tramiel bought Atari away from Warner Communications. He was the person who I think had been in charge of Commodore.
Mm-hmm.
And he came in, and of course I wasn't there, so this is hearsay, but he started calling in people right and left to his office, sat behind his desk, they would walk inside. He didn't have a chair for them to sit in. And he would say, okay, you've got 30 seconds to tell me why you should have a job when you leave the room. And a lot of people said, well, screw you, and walked out. And a lot of people cowered and, please don't fire me. But, yeah, the company just, everybody that I knew that had stayed there and got through the why should you still have a job said that it was a horrible place to work after that. All of the fun had been sucked out of it, you know, which is too bad because, like I said earlier, there were a lot of fun times. And not the least of them were getting to go to trade shows and getting to go to the hospitality suites where there were endless bowls of shrimp on ice and expensive liquor.
So Atari did come out with the light pen. Actually, they had a couple over the years. And then they also did come out with a touch tablet. I'm wondering if the one that I'm thinking of is the one that you did, or if this was another one.
Was like a little 4-inch square.
Yeah, the CX77 touch tablet. So you were product manager for that for a minute?
yeah, long enough to make sure that they continued, even if they were not being actively requested, by the sales department. But yeah, and my schedule for getting them both out was probably 2 months after I left, and I think they came out within 8 or 10 months. So they were a little delayed, but they came out. Mm-hmm. But there wasn't a mouse.
So what was the opportunity that you left Atari for?
There was a small startup company called Vimart, and they were creating a point-of-sale mini kiosk to demonstrate software. It was all Laserdisc-based, about 50 to 60-second quick overview demos, sometimes with some really interesting little verbal patter to make people excited about it, especially if they were games. And people could just walk up to the thing, and there was a screen that was up. It would say, do you want to see games? Do you want to see productivity? Do you want to see whatever? And you touch a 10 keypad that was built into the thing, and then it would give you a list of the different things, and you touched whatever of the key or keys that would bring that up, and the Laserdisc would go out and bring that up and play it, and then at the end it would return back to that menu. It was really quite nice, and in all of the 600 or so locations where it was placed, it doubled and tripled software sales.
Wow.
But we're talking places like Sears. Most of the places were being handled by a book distributor, and in the end, after about 2 years of success, the book distributor had been withholding payment to us, and they finally said, well, we're not going to pay you for the last few months because sales have plateaued. And we said, well, either pay us or send the machines back. And they said, oh, we're going to send the machines back, but we're going to send them back COD. And that kind of killed that company. I was the publications manager, but I also wrote some of the intro speeches and things like that for the different video segments. And after that, I puttered around the house for about 3 months before my darling wife, who had taken a job at Apple a couple of years earlier, called up and she said, would you want to come here to Apple to work? I said, yeah. So she said, well, come on in this afternoon. You'll meet with a woman who's been trying to find somebody to fill a trainer position or writing training material position for the last year. And if she doesn't fill it within about a week, she loses the money and the position. So I took a shower, shaved for the first time in a week, went in, and I met with a very nice woman who became a friend later on, and gave her my resume, and she said, wow, I want you to meet the director. So I met the director, and then the director said he wanted me to meet the VP of the sales department, and I did, and I came to work the next day for them.
Wow.
And stayed there for 7.5 years.
And what were you training people about?
Well, it was all new product based. And in the first, probably 3.5 to 4 years, it was based around twice yearly huge events where we would bring all 130 to 150 trainers from around the world in to San Jose, wine them, dine them, and train them over a 4 or 5 day period on everything that was going to be coming out probably about 30 days later, send them home with massive 3-ring binders full of printed material, and in some cases, stacks of audio cassettes where I would have the actual product managers in a recording studio and would ask them pertinent questions about, why is it like this and how did you come to add this feature and what features would you like to see? And they went home and they were very happy. And then one day, my director came to me and said, Tom, we've been spending roughly $400,000 each, twice a year on these events. What can you do for $25,000? Because our budget has been slashed.
Hmm.
And so I took a look at this brand new product that Apple had just come out with called a CD-ROM drive. I read up on CD-ROMs and figured out they could be interactive. And there was this wonderful little programming language called HyperCard. So I hired a HyperCard expert, and he and I put together a fully interactive training program on a single CD-ROM that covered everything that we had been doing before, but we also made it so that people could take their own idea of the ideal path through all the information.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a huge hit. And that became the standard until Laserdiscs came out, and then they tried for a while to incorporate Laserdiscs because of being able to use video and that sort of thing. But the state of the Laserdiscs being about an hour per side and giving you the kind of interactivity that we needed, it meant that any kind of training that I could put on a single CD-ROM using, very simplistic graphics, generally took 7 to 10 Laserdiscs, and then you ran into the, ham-fisted people who can't gently put a Laserdisc into a machine, and they were breaking the machines.
Right.
The remote controls were getting lost. So anyway, I actually won an award for creating, if not the first training on a CD-ROM, the first completely interactive training on a CD-ROM.
Nice.
Which is very nice.
Cool.
Yeah.
So today,
today,
I understand you write Tom Swift fan fiction?
Yeah. Yeah, they're, let's see, 2009, I picked up some of my old Tom Swift Jr. books. Those were the ones that were from 1954 to about 1972. And I started reading them, which I have done pretty much all of my adult life, every 6 or 7 years. I've just gone through the entire series. And about 3/4 of the way through the first one, I had this epiphany, and I went, uh-oh, the science doesn't hold up. And uh-oh, the characters are just, ooh. So I went looking on the internet to see if there was any chance that there might be some new Tom Swift stuff coming out, knowing that the publisher, Simon & Schuster, who had purchased Grosset and Dunlap, who had purchased the Stratemeyer Syndicate, who were the ones that started the whole thing back in 1910, had done a really horrible hatchet job with a 5th series of only 6 books that were very, very short and were written more toward 7 to 10-year-olds than teenagers and young adults. But I did find a website of a gentleman down in Southern California who had been taking it on himself to modernize and reimagine the Tom Swift Jr. books. And he had them all out there for download, and so I downloaded the first one, having just read the published version. And I went, oh, this is nice. I read the second and the third, and then I sent him an email, and I said, I am just really impressed. You have now given new life and new hope to me. And he and I communicated back and forth for a couple of months before he finally sent me an email that said, Tom, now, I don't want you to take this wrong, but where most people send me emails of 2 or 3 sentences, you send me emails of 5 to 10 screens, and you actually organize your thoughts very well. Have you ever thought of writing? And so I used to write all this training material. I said, well, you ought to think about writing a Tom Swift story. Obviously, you love Tom Swift. So I told Patty about it, and she looked at me and she said, you have always told me that you wanted to write a book. Do it. And so after bowing and saying, "Yes, ma'am," I sat down at the computer, and a month later I had 74,000 words and was, well, the British say gobsmacked, but I was totally shocked that it had come out as fast and as furious and as well as it did. Because I let it sit for a couple of weeks, and then I read through it and went, well, this isn't bad. So I sent it to Scott, the guy down in Southern California, and he wrote back and he says, okay, now, when I told you that you should write a book, I didn't mean that you should write one better than mine. But I started writing them. I just recently finished my 15th novel in a Tom Swift series.
Mm-hmm.
I've got actually about 40 books that are available out there in all the usual electronic places, and continuing to do more and more. And yes, it is technically fan fiction because this is all self-published or published via an on-demand printer. But like Scott and like the 5 or 6 other authors out there doing this, we have all decided that if it's not going to be as professional as possible, if it's not going to be as good as or better than the original Tom Swift Jr. series, which most of them were based roughly around, if it's not going to have the same kind of high standards and completely get away from what has killed a lot of fan fiction, and that's, making it all dirty and smutty and things like that, why bother to do it? And so we have between us over 50 new novels, as well as Scott's 31 or 32 rewrites. And we're putting out more and more and more and having a good time at it and not making hardly any money at all, because technically, as fan fiction authors, we really are not supposed to make any money. But, unless you put them out on Amazon and they have minimum prices for even things like Kindle books, there's almost no way of getting the word out.
Right. Yeah.
But it keeps me occupied, keeps me from annoying my wife. Since I did retire when I left the Bay Area in 2005, I discovered very quickly that you need to have something to retire to do, and it can't be something like stamp collecting that you work on maybe half an hour once a week. It needs to be something that keeps you out of the hair and out of the sight of those that love you and that are stuck in the same house as you. And it has to keep your brain stimulated. And the writing does it for me.
Awesome.
Yeah. And like I said, I enjoy it.
Nice. If you could send a message to the people who used Atari computers and touch tablets and mice and light pens and everything back in the day, and you can right now, because they're listening to this, what would you tell them?
I would say, first of all, congratulations on being among the forefront of people using a personal computer. If you continued using it for months or years after Atari kind of dropped the ball on everything, I wish that I had been among you, but unfortunately, the Atari 800 that I received when I first went to work for them was stolen in a house break-in, and I never did get it replaced, but I would have loved to have been able to continue to use it. In fact, every once in a while, I wish I had it sitting in a box. But no, for all of you people who did either embrace or at least utilize the Atari 800, the Atari 400, the couple of ones that came out briefly after that, I'm sure that you had a good experience. And thank you.
Awesome.
And that's about it.
All right. I got what I need. Thank you so much, Thomas.
You are very welcome. Have a great day.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute something, I encourage you instead to donate to one of our favorite organizations, the Internet Archive, at archive.org. The Internet Archive is a nonprofit digital library with the stated mission of universal access to all knowledge. They've done incredible things to preserve computer history, including hosting thousands of programs in an in-browser Atari emulator, creating the Wayback Machine, and offering full-page scans of countless Atari computer books and magazines. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate.